The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Elion heard the sound. It was not a loud sound. It was not the kind of sound that shook a person out of sleep or sent them rushing to the window in alarm. It was low and rough and wet, somewhere between a groan and a breath. The sound of something very large and very hurt, trying not to make any sound at all. Elion heard it because he was always a light sleeper, and because the wind had died for just a moment, and because the silence that came after the sound was heavier than it should have been. He sat up in bed. The candle on his bedside table had burned to a stub. The room was mostly dark. Outside, the rain came down in thick, cold sheets, the kind that soaked through wool and wood alike. It was late autumn in the village of Aldenmere, and the nights had turned bitter weeks ago. Elion pulled his blanket back, swung his legs off the bed, and sat still for a second with his feet on the cold floor, listening. There it was again. He grabbed his coat off the hook without thinking, pushed his feet into his boots without lacing them, and took the small lantern from the shelf by the door. He lit it with the stub of the candle, turned the flame low, and stepped outside. The wind hit him at once. He pulled the coat tighter and moved around the side of the cottage toward the garden fence. The lantern light swung in his hand, throwing long shadows across the wet grass. The garden was mostly bare this late in the season. A few rows of root vegetables still held on under straw cover. The apple tree in the corner had lost its last leaves, and lying against the base of the fence, half in and half out of the shadow of the tree, was the largest wolf Elion had ever seen in his life. He stopped walking. The wolf did not move. Its eyes were half closed. Its coat was silver, soaked completely through, plastered flat against its body so that every rib and shoulder bone showed clearly. Along its left flank, something dark and wet glistened under the lantern light. Not rain. Elion took one step closer and crouched, holding the lantern out carefully. Wounds, 3 of them, long and deep, crossing each other in a pattern that did not come from a fall or a branch. Those came from claws. Something had fought this animal, and fought it hard. Elion set the lantern on the ground and pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of the wolf's neck, just below the jaw. The pulse was there, slow and heavy, but there. He exhaled. He should have gone back inside. He knew that. Every sensible part of him knew that a wounded wild animal in the dark and rain was not a thing to touch or approach or bring any closer, but Elion had a way of looking at hurt things and seeing the hurt before he saw anything else. He had always been like this. When he was 7 years old, he had carried a broken-winged sparrow home in his shirt pocket and fed it drops of water from a spoon for 2 weeks until it flew away. When he was 19, he had found a dog on the road with a torn leg and spent 3 nights sleeping on the floor beside it so it would not be alone in the dark. He was 31 now, and he had not changed at all. He looked at the wolf. He looked at the wounds. He looked at the rain coming down on both of them. Then he stood up, went back inside, and came back with a length of thick rope, 2 old wool blankets, and a wooden sled he used in winter to carry firewood. What followed was not graceful. Elion was not a small man, but the wolf was enormous, bigger than any wolf he had seen in his years living on the mountain edge, bigger than the pack wolves that sometimes passed through the valley in winter. He worked slowly and carefully, looping the rope gently under the wolf's body, spreading 1 blanket across the sled, and then, with a great deal of effort and several stops to catch his breath, managing to ease the animal onto the sled and drag it across the wet grass and through the back door of the cottage. The wolf did not stir through any of it. It breathed. That was all. Elion got it as far as the hearthrug, which was the warmest spot in the cottage, and left it there while he got the fire going again. He was tired and soaked, and his arms ached from the dragging. He peeled off his wet coat and hung it by the door, then knelt beside the wolf and looked at the wounds properly in the firelight. They needed cleaning. They needed to be packed. He had done this before for animals, not wounds quite this severe, but the principle was the same. He gathered what he had: clean cloths, a jar of salve made from pine resin and beeswax, and herbs he had dried himself, a bowl of water he warmed by the fire, a bottle of strong vinegar he kept for exactly these situations. He worked quietly for a long time. The wolf's breathing changed a little while he worked. It became less shallow. Some of the tension went out of its body the way tension does when something in pain is finally allowed to stop fighting it. Elion noticed this and worked more gently, pressing the salve into the wounds with the lightest possible touch, speaking under his breath the whole time. He always talked when he was working on animals. He did not know why. It was just something he did. You picked a bad night for it, he said quietly. Whatever happened to you, you picked a very bad night. The wolf's ear moved. Just slightly. You're all right now, Elian said. You're out of the rain. He finished with the wounds and pressed a clean cloth firmly over them, then sat back on his heels and looked at the wolf properly for the first time, without the emergency of it filling his attention. He had never seen a wolf this size. The weight of it, the sheer scale of it, and it was young, he thought. The face had a softness that very old animals lost, a certain roundness around the muzzle. A large breed, clearly. Some kind of mountain direwolf, perhaps. One of the bigger strains that lived higher up in the ranges where people rarely went. A lost pup, then. A very large, very lost, very badly hurt pup. Mochi, Elian said. He did not know why that name came out, it just did. It sounded soft and round, and the wolf, at this particular moment, looked soft and round in spite of its size, curled on his hearthrug with its eyes closed, and its wet silver fur beginning to dry in the heat. I'm going to call you Mochi. The wolf said nothing, because it was a wolf. Elian got up, found his oldest and thickest spare blanket, and draped it over the wolf's back and sides, tucking it in at the edges the way you would for something small and cold. Then he sat down on the floor beside it, meaning to stay awake for a while and watch its breathing. He was asleep in 10 minutes, leaning sideways against the wolf's enormous warm flank, his head resting on its shoulder, his blanket pulled over his own knees. The fire cracked and shifted. The rain hit the windows. The wolf opened its eyes. They were pale gray, those eyes. Pale gray and steady and very, very awake. They moved across the ceiling of the cottage, then across the walls, taking in the room with the kind of slow, methodical attention that had nothing to do with confusion and everything to do with long habit. The rope of herbs hanging from the rafters, the stacked firewood along the far wall, the shelf of jars and bottles, the 2 chairs by the table, the single door, the 2 windows, both shuttered from inside. Then the eyes moved down to the person sleeping against its side. Small, compared to most. Dark hair, still damp at the edges from the rain. A face that was, even in sleep, slightly worried-looking, as though the owner of it had not quite figured out how to stop thinking. A coat too large for him, half on and half off. Boots that were not laced. Cael Ashvorn, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, first of his bloodline, commander of the Ashvorn war pack, a man whose name alone had ended 3 border conflicts in the last 4 years, lay still on a stranger's hearthrug and did not move. The wounds in his flank burned. He was aware of them in the dull, informational way that a person who had been wounded many times learned to be aware of pain, present, noted, not in command. He was aware of the salve on them, the cloth pressed over them, the careful binding. He was aware that someone had done this work well. He was aware, more than anything, of the small, warm weight against his side. He had shifted into wolf form 3 days ago, during the ambush. It had been instinct. 4 of them, coming from the tree line, armed and organized and expecting him. His guard had been separated from him in the first seconds. He had fought his way out and then run, bleeding, until the cold and the blood loss had pulled him down somewhere in the dark. He did not remember the fence, or the garden, or being moved. He remembered a voice, quiet and a little rough with sleep, talking about the rain. He looked at the ceiling of the cottage. He should shift back. He should get up, find his bearings, send a signal to his guard. He should not be here, on a stranger's floor, in wolf form, with a blanket tucked around him like a child. He looked at the person asleep against his side. The fire settled. Outside, the rain had slowed. A long and complicated kind of silence filled the room. Cael considered his options with the same clear attention he brought to every tactical situation, measured them, weighed them, arrived at a conclusion. The wounds needed more time. Moving now would undo the work that had been done on them. He would stay until morning. That was the logical choice, the only sensible choice. He closed his eyes. In the morning, he would leave. He was certain of this. He was the Alpha King. He had wars to return to, councils to lead, a border that needed holding. He did not stay in small warm cottages on the floors of strangers who talked to him about the rain. He was absolutely certain. He stayed very still, and the fire burned low, and the stranger at his side breathed slowly in and out, and Cael Ashvorn, who had not slept without one eye open in 7 years, found himself, without meaning to, and without quite understanding how, sleeping. The morning came gray and cold and quiet after the storm. Elion opened his eyes, registered that the floor was hard under him, and that something very warm and very large was at his back, and lay still for a moment, trying to remember what was happening. Then he remembered. He sat up carefully, checked the wolf's breathing, still slow, but stronger than the night before, and went to put the kettle on. He moved around his small kitchen, in the easy, half-awake way of someone who knew exactly where everything was, without having to think about it. He put water on to heat. He found the last of the dried chicken he had hanging, and began pulling it into pieces for broth. He was not sure wolves drank broth, but he was not sure they did not, and the wounds had been deep, and the blood loss had been real, and broth was what Elion made when he did not know what else to do. The wolf watched him from the hearthrug. He could feel its eyes on his back. "Good morning, Mochi," he said, without turning around. "You have good color today. Your breathing is better." The wolf said nothing. "I'm making broth," Elion said. "I don't know if you'll want it. But I'm making it." He made the broth. He ladled it into a wide, shallow bowl, the widest he had, and carried it over to the hearthrug and set it down in front of the wolf. Then he sat cross-legged on the floor beside it and drank his own tea and waited. The wolf looked at the bowl for a long time. Then it lowered its head and drank. Elion smiled into his tea and said nothing. Outside, Aldenmere was waking up. He could hear the mill starting, and someone's goats being let out, and the distant sound of the baker's boy making his rounds with the morning bread. Life in the village moved in a rhythm he had lived with for 6 years now, since he had left the city and come here to the edge of the mountain territory, where the air was cleaner and the people were quieter, and nobody asked him too many questions. He looked at the wolf drinking broth from his widest bowl and thought that his life had taken some strange turns, and this one was among the stranger ones, and he was not unhappy about it. "I don't know where you came from," he said, "and I'm not going to push you out before you're ready. You can stay as long as you need." The wolf looked up at him, those gray eyes again, pale and steady and sharper than any animal's eyes had a right to be. Elion looked back, comfortable and unhurried, the way he always was with animals. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't tell anyone you're here." He meant it as a kindness. He had no idea, not even a small one, how significant that sentence was. He had no idea what he had brought in from the rain. He had no idea whose eyes were watching him from across that hearth. He finished his tea, washed the bowl, and went to check the wounds. They were holding well. The salve had done its work overnight. He applied a fresh layer, gentle and thorough, and covered them again with clean cloth. The wolf held very still the whole time. Elion patted its shoulder when he was done, the way you would pat a large, good-natured dog, the way you would pat something you were already, without quite deciding to, beginning to care about. "Good pup," he said quietly. There was a sound from the wolf that was not quite a sound, something very low and brief and difficult to describe. Elion assumed it was a sound of pain. He looked concerned for a moment, then decided the wounds were not worse, and went to wash his hands, and did not see the expression, if wolves could be said to have expressions, that crossed the wolf's face in the second after he turned away. It was not pain. It was something much harder to name, and much more dangerous, for a king who had absolutely decided he would leave in the morning. He had not left. He was still here. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part that was still purely wolf, and not at all king, something had settled, quiet and warm, and completely without his permission, like a fire that had been burning for a long time, and had finally, at last, found a place to rest. 3 days passed. Elion named the wolf Mochi on the first night, and had not thought to question it since. He fed him broth, and, when it became clear the wolf could manage solid food, small pieces of cooked meat that he was careful to debone thoroughly. He changed the dressings on the wounds every morning and every evening. He talked, constantly, about nothing in particular: the weather, the neighbors, the state of his root vegetables, the book he was reading, the way the mountains looked when the cloud lifted. The wolf listened to all of it. Elion was fairly certain of this. The ears moved. The eyes tracked him around the room. When he sat down to read in the evening, the wolf's head would turn and rest on the floor facing him, watching. "You are a very attentive pup," Elion told it, on the third evening. He was sitting in his chair by the fire, with the book open in his lap, but he had not read a word in 10 minutes. He was watching the wolf instead, the way you watch something you are still trying to understand. "I have never had a dog," he said. "I always wanted one. My mother thought they were too much trouble. I think she was wrong." He paused. "You are quite a lot of trouble, but not in a bad way." The wolf blinked. "I wonder where you came from," Elion said, not for the first time. He had wondered this many times in the last 3 days, and he had not come any closer to an answer. There were no wolf packs in the immediate valley that ran this large. The nearest high mountain pack territory was a full day's journey north. He had thought perhaps the wolf had been driven down by the storm, or separated from its pack during a hunt, or simply lost. He had not thought of the wounds again as anything other than the result of a fight with another animal. He had not thought about the pattern of them, the deliberate crossing lines that were not the random marks of a struggle, but something more directed. He was not thinking about it now. He was thinking that Mochi had very kind eyes for a wolf, and that it was getting late, and that his back hurt from sitting on the floor so much of the past 3 days. He moved from the chair to the hearthrug, settling himself beside the wolf with his back against its side, the way he had fallen asleep on the first night. He had started doing this deliberately now. The wolf was warm, and the floor was not as cold near the fire. And there was something about sitting that close to something breathing that made him feel less alone in a way he could not quite name. The wolf went very still when he settled against it. Very still. And then, slowly, deliberately, it let out a long, slow breath and relaxed. Elion opened his book. He did not read more than 2 pages before his eyes started closing. He was asleep before the candle on the table had burned down another inch. And the wolf was not asleep. The wolf was very awake. The wolf, the man inside the wolf, was engaged in the most disciplined act of self-control he had performed in recent memory, which was simply lying still and not doing anything dramatic. Cael had been a soldier since he was 16. He had been a leader of soldiers since he was 21. He was 34 years old now, and in those 18 years of war and command and the endless, grinding weight of responsibility, he had learned many things. He had learned how to read a battlefield before the first blow was struck. He had learned how to hold a line when everything in him wanted to break. He had learned how to make the hard choices and live with them after. He had not learned how to handle this. He had not left in the morning because the wounds were genuinely not ready. That was true, and it remained true through the second morning and the third. The body in wolf form healed faster than in human form, but deep wounds needed time regardless of form, and moving too soon would tear them open and undo everything. This was simply medical fact. He was holding on to medical fact with both hands. The person sleeping against his side had brought him in from the rain, had cleaned wounds that were deep enough to scar, had talked to him for 3 days about root vegetables and books, and the neighbor's goats, with the easy, steady kindness of someone who did not need anything in return and was not performing anything for an audience, had called him Mochi without a trace of self-consciousness, and had clearly meant it entirely as an affectionate thing. No one had been affectionate to Cael Ashvorn in a very long time. He had not noticed how much he had not missed it until it was present. He looked at the ceiling. He breathed carefully. He thought about the border situation, which was a genuinely serious problem that required his attention. He thought about his guard, who would be searching for him. He thought about the council meeting he was already many days late for. He thought about a quiet voice saying, "You'll be all right. You're out of the rain." He closed his eyes. He was leaving in the morning. He was absolutely certain. Outside, an owl called once and then was silent, and the fire settled into red coals, and in a small cottage at the edge of the mountain territory, a sleepy man and a very awake wolf sat together in the dark, and the night moved slow and quiet around them, and nobody who would have been interested knew where either of them was. On the 4th morning, 3 men arrived at Elion's door. Elion heard the knock while he was at the hearth stirring a pot of oat porridge. He glanced at the wolf, who had gone very still the moment the sound of boots on the path outside reached them, several seconds before the knock came. Elion registered this distantly, filed it somewhere, and went to open the door. 3 men stood in the path outside. They were large, larger than most men Elion had met, and he was not a small man himself. They wore traveling clothes that had clearly been expensive once, and were now very muddy and worn through in the way of people who had been sleeping rough for days. Their faces were tight and urgent, and the one in the front spoke immediately. "Good morning," he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be casual and not managing it well. "We apologize for the early hour. We are looking for a wolf, an extremely large one, silver coat, heavy build, very old scarring on the right shoulder. We have tracked it to this area." Elian looked at him, then at the other two, then back at the first one. "A wolf," he said. "Yes, very large. You may have heard something in the night, or seen tracks." Elian thought about Mochi, sleeping on his hearthrug. Mochi, who was very large and silver-coated, and had old scarring on his right shoulder, which Elian had cleaned and examined thoroughly, and knew as well as the lines of his own hands. "No," Elian said pleasantly. "I haven't seen any wolves." The man's eyes went to the space over Elian's shoulder, into the dim interior of the cottage. Elian was standing in the doorway, and the door was not open wide enough to see the hearthrug from where the man was standing. "Are you certain?" the man said. "I am certain," Elian said. He said it the way he said most things, without particular emphasis or force, just simple and clear and final. There was something about the way Elian said things that left very little room to push against, not because he was cold or hard, but because he seemed genuinely untroubled by the possibility of disagreement. The man looked at him for a moment longer, then he looked at his companions, then he looked past Elian's shoulder one more time, and this time his gaze caught something, because the door was open wide enough now to see the far end of the hearthrug, and the wolf was at the far end of the hearthrug, and the wolf had not moved, but it was there. The man went pale, not white, exactly, but the color that comes to a person's face when they see something that they expected to find, only after much more searching, and have not had time to prepare their reaction. Pale, and still, and immediately, completely silent. Elian glanced back, looked at the wolf, looked at the man, looked at the wolf again. "That's Mochi," Elian said. "He's been here a few days. I found him in the garden." The man stared at the wolf. The wolf looked back. The moment stretched out, thin and strange, and full of something Elian could not quite read. Something passing between the man and the wolf that had nothing to do with Elian and was not being explained to him. Then Elian pulled the door most of the way closed. "He is not well enough to be moved," Elian said, to the man's face through the gap. "When he is better, I will open the back gate, and he can go where he wants. If he is yours, you can wait in the village. The inn at the crossroads takes travelers." He said it kindly. He closed the door. He stood in his front hallway for a moment in the quiet after. Then he turned and walked back to the hearthrug, and sat down across from the wolf and looked at it very carefully. The wolf looked back, those gray eyes, pale and steady, watching him. "They were looking for you," Elian said. The wolf did not move. "They seemed very upset to find you here," Elian said. Still nothing. Elian was quiet for a while. He poured himself a cup of tea from the pot on the hearth and wrapped both hands around it and looked at the wolf over the rim of it. He was a person who thought carefully before he spoke, who sat with things until he understood them, who did not need to fill silence with words. This was perhaps why he was comfortable with animals in a way that many people were not. He had patience. He had the particular kind of patience that did not press. He thought about the wounds, the pattern of them. He thought about the men at his door, who had been searching for days and whose voices had had the edge of people who were answerable to someone important for their failure to find what they were looking for. He thought about the wolf's eyes, which had been sharper than any animal's eyes had a right to be since the first morning he had looked into them. He thought about many things, and then he stopped thinking and simply sat with the wolf in the quiet of the morning, and the fire burned, and the porridge was ready, and outside the village moved through its ordinary day with no idea at all about any of this. "All right," Elian said finally. He got up to dish out the porridge. "All right, Mochi." He did not say what he meant by it. He was not entirely sure himself, but something in the word was a kind of agreement, a kind of quiet decision, a door closing softly on questions he was choosing, for now, not to ask. Behind him, something shifted in the wolf's breathing, something very small, something that might, if you were listening for it, have sounded like relief. On the fifth morning, before the light came, Elian woke to find that the wolf was gone. He sat up fast. The hearthrug was empty. The blanket he had been using to cover the wolf was folded neatly at one end, which was strange, because wolves did not fold blankets. He stared at the folded blanket for a moment, very awake, and then he heard something from the kitchen. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen doorway. A man was sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet under the window, his knees pulled up, a rough woven cloth, Elian's spare kitchen apron, which had been on the hook, draped across his lap. He was very large, broader in the shoulder than the three men at the door had been. He had silver fair hair, cut short and growing out unevenly, and old scars across his collarbone and upper arms that Elian had, in a different context, seen and cleaned before. He was looking at the floor in front of him, with an expression that was somewhere between exhausted and resigned, and very, very carefully composed. He looked up when Elian appeared in the doorway. Gray eyes, pale and steady, and sharper than they had any right to be. Elian stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he went to the shelf and took down a blanket, the thick one, the good one, and crossed the kitchen and held it out. The man looked at it. Then he took it. He pulled it around his shoulders without a word. Elian went to the stove and put water on. His hands were steady. He was not sure why they were steady, given what was happening, but they were. He was a person who responded to the immediate and practical thing in front of him, and the immediate and practical thing in front of him was a large man sitting on his kitchen floor in the cold and clearly needing something hot. He made porridge. He made tea. He put both on the table. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across the table from the man who was still on the floor, and waited. After a moment, the man got up. He moved carefully, favoring his left side, and sat down in the chair across from Elian. He looked at the porridge. He looked at the tea. He looked at Elian. Elian pushed the porridge toward him. The man picked up the spoon. They sat in the early morning quiet while he ate, and Elian drank his tea and did not rush anything. When the bowl was empty, Elian put his hands around his own cup and said, in the same simple, direct way he said most things, "You are the wolf, aren't you?" It was not exactly a question. The man was quiet for a moment. He set the spoon down. He looked at Elian across the table, and there was something in his face that was not quite what Elian had been expecting, not guarded or calculating, not the face of someone deciding what to say. It was the face of someone who had run out of the energy required to pretend, and was simply, for a moment, not pretending. "Yes," he said. His voice was low. It was not a soft voice. It was the kind of voice that had been used to give orders, and had learned to keep itself level, always level, regardless of what was underneath it. Elian nodded. He looked into his tea. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "I called you Mochi." "I know," the man said. Another quiet. The light was coming up outside. The first bird started somewhere in the apple tree. "What is your name?" Elian said. The man looked at him. Something passed across his face, brief and unreadable. "Cael," he said. "Not the rest of it, just the name." Elian did not ask for the rest of it. "I'm Elian," Elian said. Cael looked at him for a moment, and then something in his face shifted. Not much, a very small thing, but it was there. "I know," he said. "You've told me. Several times. You talk a great deal when you are working." Elian considered this. "I do," he agreed. "Does it bother you?" "No," Cael said. There was something in the way he said it that was more honest than he had intended to be, and they both seemed to hear it at the same time. And then neither of them said anything for a moment. "The men who came to the door," Elian said. "They were looking for you." "Yes." "They were frightened," Elian said. "Not of me, of having to explain to whoever sent them that they had not found you." Cael said nothing. "Someone is waiting for you," Elian said. Not an accusation, just an observation, the kind he made about the weather or the state of his vegetables, plain and careful and without pressure. "Many people," Cael said, "many things." "That sounds hard," Elian said. Cael looked at him. It was a look that lasted a second or two longer than it needed to, as though he was checking whether Elian was being sincere. Elian was always being sincere. He did not have another setting. "It is," Cael said. Elian finished his tea. He got up and poured another. He poured one for Cael without asking, set it in front of him, sat back down. "Your wounds," he said. "How do they feel?" Cael glanced down. In wolf form, the healing had been faster, but the shift back had pulled at the new skin. Manageable, he said. I should look at them, Elian said, before you go. Cael looked at him at the word go, just briefly. I do need to go, he said. Today. There are things that cannot wait much longer. I understand, Elian said. And the way he said it, simple and true and without any weight attached to it, without the particular hurt that people usually carried in words like that, made something tighten in Cael's chest in a way that he did not examine closely, because he already knew that examining it would not help him do what he needed to do. He sat still while Elian looked at the wounds. He sat still while Elian cleaned them one last time and applied the salve with the same careful hands that had done it every day for 5 days. The same unhurried attention. He had sat still under many things in his life. This was the hardest. When Elian was done, he stepped back and looked at Cael in the clear morning light. Good, he said. They'll hold. Cael stood up. He was a head taller than Elian, standing. Broader by a considerable measure. He looked around the kitchen, the small worn table, the herbs on the shelf, the dried flowers in the window, the hearthrug visible through the doorway, the fire already built up for the morning. He looked at Elian. He did not know how to say the things that were in his mind. He was not sure he had the right to say them. He was a man who had not asked for help in a very long time, and did not know the words for gratitude that felt equal to what had been given. You kept me alive, he said. It came out very simply, because it was simple, true and simple. You kept yourself alive, Elian said. I just kept you warm. Cael looked at him for a moment. That is not a small thing, he said. Elian met his eyes. No, he agreed. It isn't. They stood in the kitchen in the morning light, and the fire burned in the other room, and outside the village was starting its day, and none of it touched the particular quality of the quiet between them. I don't know when I'll pass this way again, Cael said. He meant it as a warning, or perhaps an apology. He was not sure which. You know where the cottage is, Elian said. Just that. Cael looked at him one more time. Then he nodded, once, and walked to the back door, and opened it, and went out into the morning. Elian stood at the kitchen window, and watched the path until it was empty. Then he washed both cups, and the bowl, and put them away, and went about his day. 3 months passed. The winter came in hard and early, burying the mountain paths under heavy snow. The village pulled in, the way villages did in the deep cold, each house becoming its own small world, with its own light and warmth. Elian chopped extra wood. He pickled the last of the vegetables. He mended things, read things, made soup from whatever was in the cellar, and spent his evenings by the fire with his book and his tea. He did not wait. That was not what he was doing. He was simply living his life with the door not locked, which was what he always did, because he had always been someone who kept the door open. But some evenings, when the wind came down hard from the north, and the fire was burning well, and the book was not holding his attention the way it usually did, he would be quiet for a while, and think about gray eyes in the dark, and a voice that said very few words, and meant all of them. He thought about the moment in the kitchen when Cael had said that keeping someone warm was not a small thing. He thought about the way Cael had said it, the directness of it, the complete absence of performance. He had met many people in his life who said true things in a way that felt like they were watching to see the effect. Cael said true things the way you put a stone down. You said it, and it was there. Elian was a person who had been careful with his own heart for a long time. Not because he was afraid of it, but because he had learned early that care given without care taken was not kindness, it was just loss. He knew how to be present for hurt things without losing himself in the hurt. He had learned the shape of his own limits and respected them. He had not expected someone who would make him want to revise them. He did not think about this too long. He was not the kind of person who lived inside his own thoughts more than necessary. He thought about it honestly, briefly, and then he went back to his book, or his soup, or his firewood, and he let the thought settle in the back of his mind, where things settled when they had not found their time yet. In the 42nd day of deep winter, a knock came at the back door. Not the front door, where callers came. The back door, which opened to the garden and the fence and the mountain path that came down from the north. Elian looked up from the book he was reading. The fire was good. His tea was warm. Outside, the snow was falling in the particular heavy way it did in the middle of deep winter, thick and steady and without wind. He got up, he went to the back door. He opened it. The snow was falling thick outside, blurring the edges of the garden. The apple tree was just a shape in the white. The gate at the far end of the garden was open. And there, just inside the gate, very large and very still, was a silver wolf. No wounds this time. No blood in the snow. Just the wolf, standing in the falling snow with its eyes on the door, and on Elian in the door, and not moving, as though it was waiting for something, as though it was waiting to be certain of something before it came any further. Elian stood in the open door with the warm light of the cottage behind him. He looked at the wolf. He looked at the snow coming down around it. He looked at the steady gray eyes watching him from across the garden, patient and still and tired in the way that very strong things get tired when they have been strong for too long without rest. "Wipe your paws," Elian said. He stepped back from the door. The wolf came across the garden, shaking the snow from its coat, and stepped inside. Elian closed the door behind it. He went to the fire and added a log, because the room would need to be warmer now. He put the kettle on. He got the thick blanket, the good one, the one he had started thinking of as Cael's blanket even though it lived on the back of his chair, and he set it near the hearthrug. The wolf settled onto the hearthrug with the slow, careful ease of something finally allowed to stop moving. It turned twice and lay down, and the firelight caught its coat and turned it from silver to gold at the edges, and Elian sat down across from it in his chair and looked at it for a long moment. "You came back," he said. The wolf looked at him. Not the animal blank look of something that was only a wolf. The other look, the one he had seen on the first night, that he had filed away and not quite forgotten. "I'm glad," Elian said simply. He picked up his book, but he did not open it. He sat with it in his lap and looked at the fire for a while, and the wolf breathed slowly on the hearthrug, and the snow came down outside, and the cottage was warm and quiet and full of the particular peace that comes when something that has been missing for a long time comes back to where it belonged. Elian did not know all of what Cael was. He did not know the full weight of the name, the wars behind it, the cost of the crown that never left a person even when they took it off. He did not know the length of it yet, or what it would ask of him, or what he would choose when he understood it clearly. But he knew gray eyes in firelight. He knew a voice that said true things simply. He knew the particular stillness of something that had finally allowed itself to rest. He knew that the door had been left open, and that something had come through it, and that this was not an ending but a beginning, the real one, the kind that starts quietly, the kind that starts with warmth, and a cup of tea, and a name said softly in the dark. Before the hour was out, the wolf shifted. No drama, no sound, just a change, the way light changes when a cloud passes, one thing, and then another, and the cottage settling around the new shape of it. Cael sat on the hearthrug in the firelight, with the blanket pulled around his shoulders and his gray eyes on the fire. Elian set 2 cups on the table. Cael looked up. "Tea," Elian said. Cael looked at him for a long moment. Something in his face that was not composed, not careful, not the face of a king, or a commander, or a man who had learned to hold things at a distance. Something open. Something that had been waiting a long time to be open. "Thank you," he said. He meant more than the tea, and they both knew it, and neither of them made it into a larger thing than it already was. They sat at the table together as the fire burned and the snow came down, and they talked this time. Not carefully, not briefly. They talked the way people talk when they have decided, without deciding, to begin. Cael told Elian things he had not told anyone, not in pieces or parables, but plainly, the way Elian talked about everything, plain and direct and without armor. The border and the weight of command and the ambush that had brought him here and the years before it and what they had cost. Elian listened. He did not fill the pauses. He did not perform understanding. He simply was there, across the table, present and steady and warm. At some point in the evening, the talking stopped and they sat in a comfortable quiet. The fire had burned low. Outside, the snow had slowed. The night was deep and soft and still. Cael was looking at his hands on the table. "I did not plan to come back," he said. It was not an apology. It was honesty. "I know," Elian said. I told myself I would not. I know that too, Elian said. Cael looked up at him. Does that bother you? Elian thought about it. He took his time with it, the way he always did, not performing consideration but actually doing it. No, he said. You came back. That is what matters. Cael looked at him for a long moment. I have responsibilities, he said carefully. Things I cannot set aside. Things that will call me away again, and not always with warning. I cannot promise you a simple life. I have a simple life, Elian said. I don't need you to bring me one. I need you to come through the door when you can. Cael was very still. The door will not be locked, Elian said. He had said this before. He meant it just as completely now. Something shifted in Cael's face. Not breaking. Cael was not a man who broke. It was more like a wall deciding it had done its job, and that the thing it had been protecting was safe enough now to be uncovered. Something underneath the years of command and war and distance. Something that was simply a man, tired, and looking across a table at someone who kept the door open. I don't know what I am to you, Cael said quietly. I know what I feel. I am less certain what you feel. Elian looked at him steadily. You are the wolf I found in my garden, he said. You are the man who ate my porridge on the kitchen floor and said thank you. You are the person whose breathing I learned to listen for in the night. He paused. I don't have a name for it yet, but it is not nothing. Cael was quiet for a long time. No, he said at last. It is not nothing. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night was clear, and the stars were out, sharp and cold, and very far away. Inside the cottage, the fire was warm, and the tea had gone cold on the table, and neither of them moved to do anything about it. Elian reached across the table and put his hand over Cael's. He did it the way he did everything, simply, without announcement, as though it were the natural next thing in a sequence that had been building quietly for months. Cael looked at their hands on the table. He had held many things in his life: weapons, maps, orders that sent men into danger, the weight of a crown that was not a real crown but sat on him nonetheless, always, every day. He had held all of it, and he had not let it go, because that was what you did when it was yours to carry. He turned his hand over under Elian's and held on. The fire cracked. A log shifted. The cottage was quiet around them. Cael thought of a fence in the rain and a lantern light in the dark, and a voice saying, "You're out of the rain now." He thought of 3 days on a hearthrug and broth in a wide bowl, and a name said with complete affection by someone who had no idea what he was naming. He thought of gray dawns and white snow, and the distance between the life he lived and the life he had not known he wanted. He thought of a door left open. He looked at Elian across the table, and Elian looked back, and there was something between them that did not need words, had not needed them for a while, something that had built itself quietly in the warmth and the silence, and the daily ordinary acts of one person caring for another and asking nothing back. "I'll come back again," Cael said. "When I can. I'll keep coming back." "I know," Elian said. He said it the way he said things he was certain of, simply, and from the center of it, and without any room for doubt. And it was true. They both knew it was true, in the way that some things, once begun, do not unbegin. In the way that some doors, once open to the right person, do not close again. In the way that some kinds of warmth find you in the cold, and become the thing you carry back to every war, and every long road, and every dark night after, the thing that makes coming back mean something, the thing that makes the weight worth lifting. Outside, the stars were very bright. Inside, the fire burned low and warm. Cael did not leave until morning. And when he left knowing the way back. That was everything. That was enough.